This is how I make these wide rim mugs that are great for tea and coffee and perfect for hot chocolate, as you can fit on the maximum number of marshmallows. These mugs are made from clay slabs using a template. The first thing that you need to do is roll out a slab of clay. I won't go into detail here on how to roll a slab of clay, as I've made a video specially on that topic. I'll link to that video now so that if you're starting out you can get some tips that will make rolling clay easy. I will say that it's a good idea to use roller guides when you're making clay slabs. Roller guides are the wooden sticks on either side of the slab. They enable you to roll the clay at the right thickness and help to keep the slabs even. For these mugs I used 3mm roller guides. 3mm is about 1/8 of an inch. Once I've rolled the slab and run a rib over both sides to compress the clay, I put the template in place. This is a printable paper template. I'll put a link in the description below if you'd like to get a copy of it from my online store. Once the template is in place, I cut around it with my clay knife. I find the easiest way to cut around curved lines is to support the knife with my left hand as my right hand traces the outline of the template. This helps to make a smooth curve and stops the knife from cutting into the soft paper template. Incidentally, you can print off the template onto paper and then draw around it on craft foam. Craft foam is sheets of thin, rubbery, non-absorbent material that can be used with damp clay again and again. Unlike paper, which tends to go a bit crinkly when it's been used as a clay template more than a few times, when you have the outline on the craft foam, you can cut it out with scissors. Although these templates are designed to be printed off as many times as you like onto paper, making a copy from craft foam saves printing time and paper. Once you've cut around the template, the clay is still too soft to handle, so I put some paper on it and then I cover it with a flexible chopping board. You can then flip the slab over and lift the whole thing up without stretching the clay. I then transfer the slab onto a wooden drying board. An easy way to do this is to simply slide the paper off the plastic board and put it to one side until the slab is firm enough to handle without losing its shape. The clay needs to be firm enough to handle but soft enough to bend. In the meantime, I make the base of the mug. This is an offcut of clay from the slab that I rolled out earlier. I use a circular template to make the base. Any spare offcuts of clay can be wedged and reused. I spray the spare offcuts with water and then put them in a plastic bag before I wedge them for reuse. I put my maker's mark on one side and put it to one side for later. It's a good idea to keep checking on the slabs of clay that you've cut out to make sure that they're not drying out too much. You can stop them from drying out too much by covering them with a plastic bag. I then make the handle for the mug by making a thick coil of clay. I use 5mm roller guides to roll the clay into a long, narrow slab. I turn the clay over and roll the handle on both sides. When the slab is thin enough and long enough, I transfer it onto a loose piece of fabric, as it's easier to pick up on loose fabric. I rib both sides of the slab to get rid of any texture from the fabric. Then I cut around the handle using the template. The edges of the cut slab are square and rough at the moment, so I smooth them down with a damp sponge. It's much easier to smooth the edges when the clay is flat like this. Once I've sponged down all 4 edges, I curl the handle into the shape that I want it to be when it's attached to the mug. I put this on a wooden drying board so that the clay can firm up and become leather hard before I attach it. I then prepare the slab so I can join the edges by beveling both short ends. Beveling means cutting the edge of the clay at an angle so that when you put the 2 pieces of clay together, the edges overlap a little bit. This creates a stronger join and it allows you to make a flush surface. I hold the clay knife at a 45-degree angle and slowly draw it down the edge of the clay. I then turn the slab over and repeat the process on the other side. It's really important to turn the slab over before you bevel the other edge. If you don't turn the slab, you'll end up with 2 beveled edges that don't overlap. Once the edges have been beveled, I score into the clay using my clay scoring tool. This creates a rough texture in the clay that will make it easier to create a strong join. I turn the clay and score into the other edge too. I then pick up the clay slab and begin to curve it round into a cone shape. It's easier to make the cone if you rest the clay on the wide rim of the slab rather than balancing it on the narrow end. At this point, it's easier to transfer the clay cone onto a banding wheel, which is the rotating turntable that you see. I add some slip to the scored edges. Slip is a mixture of water and clay, and once it's applied to the scored edges, it acts like a glue that will bond the two sides of clay together. I apply slip to both sides. This is called slip and score. I then begin to press the two edges together to create a strong join. It's a good idea to support the inside surface of the join to stop the clay slab from losing its cone shape. Because the end of this cone is quite narrow, it's hard to get your hand inside to support it with your fingers. A good alternative is to use a wooden modelling tool to support the join as you press the edges together on the outside. Once the two sides have been joined together, I use the rubber rib to compress the seam, and then I blend the two surfaces together really well. If a small hump of clay forms at either end of the cone, you can trim this off using your clay knife. I then turn the cone over and take a look at the seam on the inside. The inside surface of the join also needs to be tidied up, so I use a wooden modelling tool to blend the two edges of clay together on the inside. The wooden tool will leave some marks in the clay. I smooth these out with a platter tool. This is the long green tool that you can see here. It works well as you can use it to get into hard to reach places to smooth the clay out. After the seam has been joined together, I smooth out the wide rim of the mug. I do this using a damp piece of chamois leather. You can also smooth out the rim of the mug when the clay is flat and before you've joined the two edges together to make a cone, but with this mug I'm smoothing out the rim after the cone has been formed. I then put the cone to one side to let the clay bond fully. I turn it upside down on an old plastic bowl to keep the rim round, and I also put an old plastic beaker in the base to keep that round too. Now I'm going to add the base to the mug. I use my clay scoring tool to score into the edge of the base, and I also score into the bottom edge of the clay cone too. I add some slip to both scored surfaces. Then I lower the top part of the mug onto the base. At this point, you can still wiggle the mug around a bit to make sure that it's positioned right in the centre of the base. Once I'm happy with the position, I press on the rim of the mug to set the two pieces of clay together. The circular base of the mug has been made just a little bit bigger than the bottom of the mug. This is to give me a bit of wiggle room when I'm lining up the two parts of the mug, and it also gives me some extra clay to blend the base on. I trim a bit of the excess clay off so that there's about 1 mm extra clay around the bottom of the mug. Then I use the flat edge of one of my wooden modelling tools to blend the excess clay onto the bottom edge of the mug. I work my way around the base, turning the mug on the banding wheel as I blend. Once it's all blended, I turn the mug over and peel off the piece of paper from the base. The paper is just to stop the mug from sticking to the wooden bat. I use the flat edge of the wooden tool again to tidy up the bottom edge of the mug. I use my clay knife to shave off a little bead of clay that has formed around the bottom edge of the mug. The wooden tool and the clay knife will leave a bit of a rough surface on the mug, so I smooth this away by wiping it over with a damp piece of chamois leather. At this point, the base will be quite securely attached to the bottom of the mug, and you would probably get away with leaving the base as it is. But if you want to be completely certain that it won't separate when it's drying, you can add a small coil of clay around the inside join of the mug. I run some extra slip around the join on the inside of the mug with a brush, and then I dangle the coil into the mug, nudging it into the bottom corner of the mug with the tips of my fingers. If the coil is too long, you can trim it off with your clay knife. Once the coil is in place, it'll look a bit like this. I then use a combination of tools to blend it in. I start off flattening the coil into the corner with the round end of a stylus tool. The stylus tool is the blue tool with the rounded metal balls on either end. Then I blend the coil in using the rounded end of a wooden tool and also my fingertips. Once it's blended in, it should look a bit like this. By now, the handle should be firm enough to pick up. I hold it in my hand as if I'm holding the mug. Then I make a mark on the handle with my thumbnail. I use my clay knife to trim the handle. When the handle is the right length, I use my clay knife to cut away a bit of clay at each end. This gives the handle a concave shape, and it helps it to sit flat against the curve of the side of the mug. I position the handle by holding it up against the side of the mug. I check that the handle is straight, then I make small marks all around the handle on the side of the mug. Next, I score into the side of the mug using my clay scoring tool. When I'm scoring the side, I score a bigger area on the mug. This is because I'm going to blend the handle onto the mug and I want the clay to blend easily together. I also score each end of the handle. Then I apply slip to each of the scored surfaces. I then put the handle back into position and press it into place. It's a good idea to put your hand on the inside of the mug and press the handle into the supporting hand. When the handle is stuck on well enough so that it doesn't fall off when I'm not supporting it, I roll a small coil of clay. I wrap the coil of clay around the handle at the point where it joins the mug. Then I gently press the coil into the join with a small wooden modelling tool. When the clay coil has been pressed into position, I start to blend the clay onto the handle and onto the mug. I work my way around the handle, blending the coil in all the way around. I then repeat the process with the lower part of the handle, wrapping the coil around, pressing it into place and blending it in. Once both ends of the handle have been blended on, I use a damp chamois leather to wipe away any texture left behind in the clay by the modelling tool. When the surface of the clay has been tidied up and you're happy with the shape of the mug and the handle, the mug is ready to be dried, fired and glazed. If you like the look of these mugs and you'd like to give them a go, you can get a copy of the template from my Etsy store. I'll put a link in the description below. Thanks for watching, bye!